Welcome back to Light the Fuse and a very special episode. We are revisiting our chat with master cinematographer Robert Elswit, a man who has a bounty of credits and a lovely filmography. I wanted to say we recorded this in 2019, I believe.
Yeah, this is back in the old in-person days.
In-person days. So I think Velvet Buzzsaw was about to come out, and I just wanted to bring up what he has shot since then, which is The King of Staten Island in 2020 for Judd Apatow.
I didn't realize he shot that. I never saw that.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
And in 2021, King Richard, the Oscar-winning.
That looked great.
It looked great. That movie is great.
I love the look of King Richard, and yeah, that shows that it was Elswit. Yeah, I mean, he's just a legend. This was probably, I was really nervous. It was a level of security for me interviewing people over Zoom where I don't get as nervous, and so the early interviews were a little more nerve-wracking for me when we talked to Brad Bird or when we talked to Elswit, and in particular, Elswit was nerve-wracking for me because he is a hero of mine, and we get to talk to him about all kinds of amazing stuff. In addition to, of course, he shot Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation. He won an Oscar for shooting There Will Be Blood. He also shot one of my absolute top 5 favorite movies of all time, Punch Drunk Love. I get to talk to him about that. And he just has amazing stories. He's so funny and blunt. And just if you didn't listen to this before, then you're in for a treat. If you have listened to it, but it's been almost 4 years since this episode came out, give it a re-listen because it's just such a great interview that we had. One of our best. This is one of the first interviews early on for us that really gave us a big boost. Because if you recall, the movie news people caught on to Elswit broke that news to everyone through our podcast that he doesn't think he'll work with Paul Thomas Anderson again. That happens in this interview. And that took off, and that gave us a huge bump because IndieWire and all these other, I think it even got to the trades. People were reporting about this news that Elswit was saying that he probably won't work with Paul Thomas Anderson again.
Whoopsie.
Which is a bummer. He didn't completely rule it out, but it doesn't sound like it's very promising. And anyway, it's a good part of the interview to listen to for sure, and everything else too, because he just gives great insight into the making of these movies and some great stories about shooting in Dubai and all that stuff. I mean, it's just for Ghost Protocol. Just, an amazing chat. And I also, since we just saw Ghost Protocol in IMAX at Beyond Fest, which was mind-blowing, it's a great time to revisit this chat and hear him talk about shooting IMAX and shooting that sequence in Dubai.
I agree. He was a lot of fun. I think we emailed him a couple of times since, and he's ignored us, so that hurts. But, I think he's got other stuff to do. And also, Velvet Buzzsaw, which was about to come out, is a good Halloween movie. So if you haven't seen it... That movie is wild. It's crazy.
It is bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. But before we get into it, Charles, I got to do my favorite part of the show, obviously, which are my shout-outs. So I want to remind everybody that this episode is brought to you by Jeremy Dillon and his podcast, My Favorite Album, John B., Elvis Ripley, and Suchet. Without these fine people, this show could not go on. And if you want to be given a shout out by yours truly, get on that Patreon and sign up for the highest level, and you too will get a shout out.
Yes.
So I think that's it. I think we got to get into this episode. This is a long chat, but it's very much worth your time. So here it is. Robert Elswit. Well, we are so thrilled to be joined today by living legend, I would say.
Oh, my God.
Living legend, Robert Elswit.
So sad.
Oscar winner for There Will Be Blood.
Yeah.
Oscar winner?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, I can feel the ego coming off of you. It's just it's too much.
I may have to get up and walk around. This is way too much for me.
Robert obviously shot Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation. And how did you initially get involved with
well, it was Brad Bird, the original Ghost Protocol. I just met with him and we got along and talked about all the movies we loved and hit it off, and so he asked me to do it.
And did you look at the previous movies?
Oh yeah, we looked at them all.
Did you watch them with Brad? And what was it like?
Yeah, with Brad. I think we looked at all, starting with the De Palma, the original one, and then saw how, at least to me anyway, it seemed like it went a little downhill, ending with the last, I think it was John Woo's version, the Australian Mission Impossible, which was, it was kind of, I don't think anybody was terribly happy with it, but why and how and all that. And then JJ's revival, JJ bringing it all back to life again, and how he did it and what he did and what was important, and finding the heart of it again, which is, of course, the heart of it all is Mr. Cruise. Mm-hmm. And Brad was really excited about getting all of that stuff together and finding some fabulous stuff for him to do. And he loves, and Brad was a huge fan of all the action movies, the sort of big budget action movies that you can imagine, going back to the Bond movies even. So we referenced a lot of stuff.
Did you look at Die Hard? Because I know he's a big fan of Die Hard.
Yes, we did. I just looked at it again because I did a film with another great guy, Rawson Thurber, in Vancouver with The Rock. And Skyscraper is kind of Die Hard meets Towering Inferno a little bit. I guess it's a little glib, but so we watched Die Hard several times, and you kind of learn to appreciate not just how well made and well directed it is, just how well written it is, and how well acted it is. Of course, who can beat Alan Rickman, the world's greatest villain? But also every single person in that movie, every character in that movie, his entire gang, are wonderfully etched out. Everybody dies in a wonderfully interesting way, and you get to know them all.
Yeah. And you got to work with one of those guys in Ghost Protocol.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So did you talk at all about what you wanted it to look like in relation to the previous movies at all? Or
it grew out of lots of conversations that had to do with finding the right locations and finding places that, how these films are constructed, and I don't know how much Chris has talked to you about any of this, but the original version of Ghost Protocol, and this may be something, because most of the people involved probably wouldn't speak about this, but I can because nobody gives a shit about what I say. So the original version of this movie was that at the end of it, Tom Cruise stops being Ethan Hawke, the agent, and becomes Ethan Hawke, the secretary. The whole version of this was they're going to put another ILM mission unit together with another actor. Maybe it's Jeremy Renner, maybe it's who knows who it is. And they're going to go through this series of wild events. And at the end, Tom gets to be the secretary and a new agent takes over the franchise, which I think seemed kind of nutty, but that was kind of the marching orders. And this is a period when Tom was maybe a little more out of favor. I don't know if that's the right word, but everybody kind of had signed off on that, and the script was a little loose. But that's what the script was. The original script that I had was kind of like that. And so you meet these other agents, and then they free Tom from prison, and then they go through all this other stuff that happens, and the secretary gets killed. One of my favorite actors I've worked with a couple of times, and Tom Wilkinson. And then Tom kind of there was a big battle at the end in the snow, and all this stuff happens, and then Tom gets elevated to secretary and all. And I can't remember who the new agent people would be, but it doesn't matter now. So as the film was made, and it's very inside, the guy who has the best version of this, by the way, is Chris. And someday when he writes his memoirs, when he, 40, 50 years from now, you'll be able to read about the inside true story of how Tom Cruise took a movie in which his character ends up being booted out of the franchise, how he took that movie and turned it into re-upping the franchise, taking over the movie, taking over the franchise, and starting it all over again.
Right.
Really. It's way too complicated, and I would be all hearsay on my part, so I don't want to get into it. But that was the look of the film, which was where we started. Kind of grew out of finding these various. What happens in these films is there are set piece action scenes that are kind of built into. There's almost in a way a starting point for the script. And I'm not sure if Tom comes in and says, I want to, I was thinking of the last movie because I can remember everything, but, I want to hold my breath underwater like one of those guys who holds their breath underwater forever. I want a scene where I do something magic underwater and, container and I almost die. I want to be strapped to the side of a plane and take off and fly around and then break into the plane. I want to ride a motorcycle at 150 miles an hour, Grand Prix style, without a helmet. And what was the other one? Anyway, I want to do those things. And Chris, you figure out a story and call me when you're done. Right. It's not quite like that,
right?
But it has that feel. And I'm trying to remember the other big stunt that started the movie.
On the side of the plane.
No, I got the side of the plane.
Yeah, and then there's also Dubai's and Ghost Protocol.
No, that's the Ghost Protocol. But I mean, the last film had a real sense of that, because to find a story, to create a story and knit all those pieces together is kind of the magic of making a movie like that, and without a story to begin with. And what you end up having to begin with is probably an idea in Tom's head and Chris's head about, well, we want to do these great stunts. When I did, it's another kind of, when we did Ghost Protocol, we started with the stuff in Europe and the stuff in Dubai. And we knew that Tom was going to get broken out of prison. We knew he was going to climb the world's tallest building and do wonderful stuff and break in and steal something. And then he was going to get in a couple of traffic accidents. And, God, how did it end up? I don't remember. Anyway,
it ended up in the car park.
In the car park. Oh, yeah, yeah. The exciting car park.
Yeah.
Jim Bissell's great car park. The great production designer, Jim Bissell. So the story around it changed dramatically because we broke Tom out of prison. We shot a lot of the interstitial material where you find out who the bad guys are and what they're doing and stuff like that and why they're doing it, sort of. Although I don't think anybody remembers the bad guy from Ghost Protocol. Do they?
Well, we do.
You
Hendrix.
do? Yeah. Good for you.
We worship this franchise, so we know all about it.
So you know all about it. Right.
Swedish Special Forces.
Yeah, the Swedish Special Forces, yeah. It's hard to remember. A lot of his scenes aren't in the movie. So
we've seen the alternate opening where he's sort of giving his dissertation. And,
yes. So a lot of stuff didn't make it. So at some point when we came back to Vancouver and did a lot of the interior work, we'd already done this sort of one big stunt in the building and breaking out of prison in Czechoslovakia and in Russia. Chris McQuarrie came in. And Chris McQuarrie and Tom sat down and said, how do we fix this so that, and there's a much better version of what I'm describing that Chris can give you, which he'll never give anybody until, he's in his 80s probably.
Right.
But there's, Chris McQuarrie came in and he kind of rewrote it, the last, half, maybe more, and made it so we had to change a few things that we shot at the beginning, like add lines, reshoot little pieces so that it all made sense. And he tied the whole thing together and made it so that at the end of the movie, the only people who get Tom ends up not becoming the secretary, but just goes on in his own lonely way. And, we meet the woman he was married to, and, he realizes he's got to go on by himself because, even though Hoffman isn't going to come back and try and kill anybody because, he's not around anymore, he doesn't want to put the rest of his life, he's going to a solitary figure. He's going to be, this guy walks off into a fog bank and appears in the next episode.
Right.
So, and that was Chris's work. And what was great about and Chris was there, and he could explain to me, because I would get confused a lot, what was going on. Like, does this tie to this? Because I would have lots of questions. We'd be doing something, and I would go, wait, now, if Jeremy Renner, does he actually know that? And I'd have some goofy question. And that whole thing on the train was really, I don't know if you know the movie really well, but, what happens in the train, it's a literal and metaphorical Tom Cruise take over the movie. He takes over the IMF crew, and he takes over the movie.
Right.
That scene does both. And he walks through you and he says, okay, here's what's happened up till now. And here's what you're all going to do, and here's who all the bad guys are. And he sort of lays the whole thing out. And the rest of the IMF team sits there and goes, okay. And that was that moment. And Chris and Tom created this, here I am, I'm back.
Yeah.
You got me out of prison, and we're not going to do that other script that you all read when you signed on. We're doing this new script, and here it is. And so that was in a way, kind of the most inside baseball version of it that I could possibly tell without screwing it up. But that's what happened.
Well, we wanted to know what it was like working with Bird, because this is the first time you'd worked with a filmmaker who came from animation.
Yeah.
And a lot of the jokes and things in the movie are very kind of cartoony or have a little bit more kind of visual punch. My favorite is when Peg is explaining that Cruise has to go outside of the building, and you do that whip pan over, and he says, "What?" and that stuff like that.
No, he was wonderful at that. And there's one moment I love, and maybe that's his sensibility. I mean, when Cruise breaks out of prison, and you see the guard. I'm trying to remember the exact way it played out, but you see there's a guard and he's mean and nasty, and all the prison doors open, and this one sort of weird little character with a very expressive face. He casts people who look like cartoon characters in this prison, and and they sort of look at each other, and I think they he knocks the guy out or something like that. But that whole thing was designed like an animated sequence all the way through, and I think the actual prison break where Tom, the guy comes in the room and he goes underneath, he has this fight. It's sort of a comic fight, but at the same time, it was laid out really well. And I think what Brad also came to realize, and he might have understood it, we had storyboards for these sequences, and sometimes animatics even, but that once you start a fight or once you start action beats that play out the way Tom plays them out, because there's no stunt person, right?
Right.
He's actually running all these stunts himself. So there's a certain speed to them, there's a certain reality to them that it's hard to dice up into small pieces, because he doesn't want to do a third of the stunt, a third of the stunt, a third of the stunt. So in Brad's original conception, there were more little cut pieces. There were more little beats where you see somebody do something, and then you cut to somebody else and they do something, and then you cut to a wider shot and you see it happen. And it just doesn't always work because of the way live action differs from animation. And the other thing I think that was maybe more of a surprise for Brad was that the commitment to, when we walk away from this set, we're never coming back. There isn't going to be a screening 2 months from now, and if the scene doesn't work, the animator's going to come in and actually change something.
Right.
There's no fixing it. And I think that was genuinely kind of like, it wasn't like he didn't know, but the reality of it was a little brutal. If we do this and we're not going to, I never liked, there were things he didn't like about certain scenes, certain scripts, certain things. And he came to, it was a difficult process for him to realize that. It wasn't difficult, but it was not as much fun for him, because he knew, the way animation is done, which is wonderful. It's very organic. It's much more organic because you create these characters and they interact with each other, and you do pencil drawings and you create a kind of small animated version of it, and you show it to people, and you show it to people who don't know it, and you show it to people who work with, and it evolves in a much more organic way over a long period of time. And that's not how movies are made, honestly. Right. I mean, they aren't. I mean, the hardest thing, I worked with a wonderful director, Tony Gilroy, who said the hardest decision he ever has to make is when to say, that's it, we're done, and walk away from a shot or a set, And that's really it, because he knows that's really it. There is no return, for the most part. Additional photography down the line is not something that happens on most movies.
Right. It does seem to be built into the Mission Impossible movies, too.
A little bit. I mean, but you can't restage a giant action sequence. Well, I mean, you can, but I mean, it doesn't happen that often.
Right.
And the complicated nature, I mean, the other thing that happened, too, was the way the Dubai sequence was conceived originally in animatic form, storyboards to animatics, was a very it had shots in it that could only be done in a computer. The kinds of things that happen in animation or visual effects too, where the camera is someplace it actually can't be, physically can't be. Like if you were in a helicopter or on a scaffold or hanging on a wire or something, your camera can be in those places. But there's certain things that happen in animation where you don't have to play by those rules. And there's lots of times, Spider-Man doesn't play by those rules.
Right.
There's lots of action movies that don't play by those rules. But with Tom, what happened was we looked at the animatic that Brad had created with all the pieces put together and all the different image sizes of the building sequence in Dubai. And at the end of it, Tom just said, okay, who's me? Where am I? What am I? How do I do this? And going through it, it was say, okay, that's you in this shot. And this shot, this is obviously digital Tom. This is digital Tom here. And then, okay, this is you. And then there's digital Tom in this next shot. And then and after a while, Tom went, there is no such thing as digital Tom. He doesn't exist. There's no digital Tom.
Right.
I'm climbing the building. I'm climbing the whole building, and I'm in every shot. And there's no fake. There's no phony moment. And he got up and left. And that was the end of that.
Wow.
So the animatic had to be redone, and it had to reflect what could really be done. And it involved kind of an extensive survey of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, and as only you can do in a country where there are no rules and there are no politics, and the only people in charge are these kind of middle-aged men with beards. You could actually go into their building and ask them to kick out all the windows and create a space that you could shoot a sequence like that in.
Right.
Nowhere else would anybody let you do that.
Right.
So but he was, he's right. He's in. There's no fakery, and that's the thing that he insists on.
Yeah.
He's got a little wire that gets taken away digitally later. It gets removed, but he's hanging on a very thin wire, wearing a harness under his costume, and he's standing outside there, doing stuff that I can't imagine anybody else would do.
Was there any kind of net or anything?
No. There's no net.
It's so crazy.
He's no net.
Yeah. Should we get into the Burj sequence? I mean,
can you talk about the IMAX too?
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty cool idea. I mean, Brad always wanted to do little IMAX pieces throughout the whole movie. We did at the beginning. We did that, the jump at the beginning with the original Mission crew. There was an IMAX. But the cool thing about if you see the movie in IMAX, because we shot the IMAX film version, and you project it on an IMAX projector. And we were very lucky there's an IMAX theater, believe it or not, in Dubai, or there was, at the racetrack of all places. And the IMAX Corporation came in and they tooled it, they put it back together so it worked perfectly. And we looked at our dailies there. We actually got filmed back and looked at it. So we were able to see it on a big screen. And the idea was kind of stolen from the old, this was Cinerama. I don't know if you guys are too young to remember any of this, but there would be the introduction of Cinerama was something like John Cameron Swayze showing you like a vista with a boat or something like that. And he would go, this is the way people normally see movies. And you'd see like 133 or 185 or whatever it was. And the curtain would be closed. And he'd go, but this is Cinerama. And the curtain would open. And all of a sudden the image would quadruple in size. From one end of the wall to the you'd see this gigantic image would open up. So that was the idea behind Tom going out the window in Burj Dubai.
Yeah,
so you're in 240, and if you see it in the IMAX theater, it's quite astonishing because the whole movie's letterbox in 70 millimeter in an IMAX projection. It's letterbox because it doesn't fit the whole 15 per projection print. But when you go out the window, you see it open up and it just surrounds your point of view, your angle of vision.
Yeah.
And
we saw it at the Lincoln Center IMAX, and we were hooting and hollering.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the most amazing thing.
And you're looking down, and there's a little bit of visual effects work down below because in Dubai, there are no, there's kind of nothing down there to give you a sense of distance. And there's nothing to tell you how high you are.
Yeah.
Because you're just looking at structures. So they put little cars and people down there. So you'd understand how, you never end up that high. There's nowhere you can go like that except in an airplane. That building is really very, very high. So anyway, so that was the reason for that. And that the IMAX would add kind of a thrill to these pieces that I think it really did. No question.
Oh, yeah. Also, McQuarrie told us one key sequence in that scene is going through the floor.
Oh, yeah.
Bird was insistent on going through the floor. So was that a real rig that you...
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a set on top of a set?
Wait, which one do you mean? Which shot?
When it goes from the hotel room above to the hotel room.
Oh, that was that was me on way too small a soundstage in Vancouver. going like that, yeah. That was the challenge of that for me, I guess, was aside from figuring, one of the things that it's really, oh God, it's all coming back to me now. Figuring out because the marvelous stunt coordinator on that movie is the great Greg Schmears, and he has to figure out how to hang Tom in all these different positions and how he's supposed to move through the space and where his crap has to be in order to hang Tom, right? So it seemed pretty clear that we had to do it on the north side of the building, so the light didn't change. So it pretty much stayed the same all day.
Oh, interesting.
And we had a model of the building, and there's a way to. They had window washing capsules at the very top of the building that came out and allowed you to kind of move and wash all the windows all the way around, all the way up the building. And it was like you could go out there with like somebody from Bangladesh and try to communicate with them so you could find a place where you could see the space outside. And I did it once because I was going to take pictures. And I was so freaked out that I said, I can't do this. And so they hired a local still photographer to go out and photograph the north side of the building in the floors we thought we could use. And then based on that, Greg and I figured out which windows we needed to get rid of in order to put the camera through the windows that we were going to shoot from, and then put his rigging through the windows above so we could hang Tom and move him through the space, the outside of the building. So, and it was kind of complicated, but we went back and did it all. And then, and because we said, can you get rid of these windows? They're big, you saw them in the movie. The set the interior of the hotel rooms are a complete Jim Bissell creation. They didn't exist. We were on a concrete floor on an unfinished interior of that space. There might be a little bit of floor, a little bit of wall for reverses, and then there was a smaller set that was built facing the same direction about 400 yards away that was 3 stories tall, which we shot for close-ups and for other things where we had to do things that we couldn't do on the tall building.
Okay.
So where we had to see Jeremy Renner, where we had to see the other IMF people in the suite as Tom swings to it and drops off.
Yeah.
It was a really accurate recreation of the outside of the building, and just enough of the inside of the building that you'd believe you were in the same room that subsequently we shot on stage in Vancouver. Because all those interiors are on stage. And there's green screen outside in which, there were all essentially plates that we shot. I can't remember if we shot plates or probably it was an ILM, but whoever, I can't remember who the visual effects were. It was ILM.
It was ILM, yeah.
Shot all the plates. And then... the guy who kind of got me through all that, of course, was the great, who was the visual effects supervisor? Somebody I've known for 30 years. Anyway, John Knowles. It's Knowles.
John Knowles, yeah.
John Knowles. So, the hard part for me was going into that was matching, to make it optically real, to make it photographically real. On stage, you really want a big space so you can motivate. All the lighting that's coming into that set is from the windows. There's no interior practicals on. There's nothing, for the most part, there isn't. So everything has to feel like it's ambient daylight, blue skylight coming in those rooms. And unfortunately, we're on a sound stage. We're on one of those Vancouver, it used to be somebody's warehouse. The ceilings aren't tall enough and the walls aren't far enough away. And so to create the illusion of ambient daylight was the hardest thing for me, because it just, that's the thing, it's the dead giveaway that you're on a stage and that you're using, because the lighting looks phony. The lighting looks artificial. The lighting looks like movie lighting.
Right.
And to try your best to avoid that was kind of a struggle, because I just couldn't get the distance, and I was shooting into green screens, and anyway, but it's okay. But I think John helped me fix it later to a great extent. Where was I about?
We're talking about going through the ceiling.
Oh, going through. So that we shot there.
Okay.
And we shot the struggle outside there. It's like with what's her name when she throws Leah Seydoux off the building and all of that. That's all in Vancouver. and that's all looking back into the set. And we had a 2-story. Was it a 2-story set? It might have been a 3-story set. I can't remember. I think it was a 2-story set. Yeah, because we only went on one floor, and we doubled the floor for the when they run around and change the numbers, and there's really one floor and there's a stairway, and we just changed the look of it. And it was, as I remember, it was a real tedious nightmare all the way through.
Well, it ended up being cinematic.
It was okay.
Magic,
it was okay.
So, yeah.
It worked out okay. It was.
So you were never outside. You were never
physically me
holding the camera.
No.
Well, there is
kidding?
That shot where he jumps over the camera.
Yeah,
which I
it's
can
a camera.
Never,
No, I mean we had movie bird. We had crane. We had 3 movie bird cranes.
But
and we
were
had
you operating?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we had IMAX. The IMAX cameras are on heads, remote heads, and we're sitting there. Positioning the cranes, picking the right windows, being able to put the camera out, and shooting all this different material on film was kind of a logistical problem that we had to solve by having several. There were small enough cranes we could get them up in the elevator, and we could put the cameras on them. We could shoot out the windows. I'm trying to remember if we had 2 or 3.
Up there?
No, there's no wind. In fact, that's the issue. Was there was no wind, and Tom always, he wants to feel there's wind out there. He wanted his hair to be blowing. He wanted his costume moving. He wanted all that. So the other part is the long-suffering special effects unit. On top of cables and crap going out there holding him from falling, they had blowers. We had tubes hanging down above him, blowing wind at him. So it would feel like there was wind. There's no wind at all. It's desert. There's nothing.
Yeah, I've been to that building. I've seen the little laminated picture of Tom
Yeah,
Cruise.
there's nothing going on.
There's nothing.
Nothing going on at all in terms of wind. And the other part, he had a wonderful, I'm trying to remember his name. He's somebody I worked with years and years ago who was a safety guy that Schmears had hanging out the window. He was hanging near Tom so that whenever Tom did something, he could catch him. Oh, God. What's his name? Anyway.
And what floor was that on?
Well, I don't remember. Zillionth floor, whatever it was. So he's he's a mountain climber. He's a famous mountain climber. And I'd worked with him on a movie years and years ago called The River Wild. And he was one of the people who actually helped us secure cameras to the side of the walls of the different mountains and granite structures we were actually shooting on. He's a wonderful guy. And he turned up on this movie. And he was the guy who hung all day outside on a cable, waiting for Tom to, finish whatever the stunt was, and he'd grab Tom and secure him. There's the thing where he runs around the building, and does that jump and all that stuff. And so I want to say Smitty, oh God, I'm so bad, is waiting there for him to catch him at the end. I'm sorry if you're listening. I apologize deeply if I can't remember you. But anyway, he had his he had a cancer scare. He had his adrenal glands removed. He had no adrenaline. He told me this. And I said, well, what is that? Is that why you're able to? He says, no, I was always able to hang outside and do shit like this. But what this does is, because I have no adrenaline going through me, I can't tell when if anything goes wrong, nothing happens. I just don't feel it. And I said, that's a bigger problem. Because if there's if there's I just go, oh yeah, okay. I'm not, I don't have that surge of like that. And so it's good and it's bad. But anyway, he was terrific guy. And he's out there the whole time. I mean, he's out there. We would stand there, the crew and I, we're all on harnesses. And we had lanyard. We had ropes that ran to a safety harness, to a safety wire. So if we fell or something happened, which it never did, our fall would be arrested by these harnesses. So we could move through them. It's like a very elaborate version of what you wear in your car seatbelt. So if you pull really fast on it, it stops you. Mm-hmm. So we could walk around, but if we move too quickly, but you were so high, up. But it really was, there were people who there was like a line that you couldn't cross unless you had a harness on. Okay. But you could, safely you could walk up to the edge and do what Tom does, but nobody could. I mean, there were people who absolutely got on their hands and knees. If they had to work near the window, they would crawl to the window. Because it's like, well, I know I've got a harness on, but your mind is just going, you're going to get, this is bad. Yeah. You could, if you fell, this would be really horrible. So your head is, occasionally, some of us got a little more used to it, but it was still always a kind of a, oh my God, we're this high. How long shall I, anyway, that was our week on the Burj Dubai.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, and that was the other thing, as I was saying, I asked when I got back there, and we put big pieces of tape on the windows that I wanted to remove and that Greg wanted to have removed, and came back. And I went, wow, how'd you do it? Because I imagine there's 12 guys with giant suction cups and they're on scaffolding. No, we just broke them. What? Yeah, we just broke them. We just broke the windows and they fell down.
What?
They fell down where? Well, down there. And well, how did you? Well, we just cleared everybody out. We put these nets down and we just broke all the windows. And they fell? Is there footage of this? Of course not. I mean, it was like, nobody else in the world would let you do that. It was just be like,
wow,
these guys.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know how they, yeah. Just broke all the windows. It was fine.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Gosh, I could talk about Dubai for hours. Yeah. But I feel like, do you want to ask about the car park? We've seen pictures of you wearing a helmet while you're shooting the car.
Well, a lot of the car mount was a wonderful second. We're second unit pieces. I guess I was there for a lot. I don't remember. I think we were doing something.
That this is you in a helmet.
Oh, is that me in the car park?
Yeah.
There's like multiple pictures of you wearing this helmet in the car park.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, we were all asked. Well, we had to. I mean, we were all asked to wear helmets. No, you're right. This is both the car park. Okay, so what it is anybody who was working in that space, because it's an industrial space, has to wear a helmet, has to wear a safety helmet. That was just the rule. When because things, it's, I can't remember. I have to ask Jim Bissell how many stories it was. It's such a big set that the only place in Canada they could build it, in Vancouver, was in this building where they'd actually constructed the Vancouver Ferry.
Oh wow!
It's I can't remember the name of it. But actually, we built the same set. We used the same space for Skyscraper.
Oh really?
Because it's the only you can build a 8-story set or a 6-story set. I don't remember how big this is, but everybody wore it.
Wow!
And it was a lot of crane work. My wonderful key grip, Chris Centrella, the king of the cranes. Works out all the crane work on both these movies.
Were those full-size cars though in that moving up and down, or?
Oh yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Then the helmet makes more sense.
Oh no, stuff could fall. I mean, people could fall. Everybody was wearing. You go up high, you wear harnesses. I mean, it's not a place. Yeah, it made perfect sense. And of course, Canada's, like we are now. We're very safety conscious. Everybody's very safety. I mean, Paramount. The last thing that we had a safety person with us the whole time. Very, very concerned about, anything. Because this is where people get hurt, And,
Well, before we move on to Rogue Nation, we wanted to talk to you because you're the only person in the world who shot a 007 movie, a Mission Impossible movie, and a Bourne movie.
Wow. Oh, my God.
So...
I forgot. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So can you talk about the differences between...
The differences,
James Bond and Mission Impossible and Jason Bourne?
I would say... I would start... start with James Bond. I mean, James Bond was a franchise that had been around for a long time, and it had also gone through this kind of decline where prior to Pierce Brosnan, they had Timothy Dalton, and they were made pretty cheaply. I mean, even the original ones were, but they because they traveled so much and there was so much wonderful stuff done in them, which nobody had seen quite the same way before. I'm thinking of... And the great Ken Adams, who was the production designer... is the one who figured out that James Bond, that the villain had to have a lair. Mm-hmm. He had to have this special place. That was his lair. And it was always this kind of extraordinary, elaborate set. In Dr. No, From Russia, not From Russia with Love, but at least in Dr. No, and then on to Goldfinger, and then all. So that sort of whole tradition was there about the scale of it. And a wonderful production. Alan Cameron was the production designer on the one I did, and he was very aware of that. And when I went to work with the wonderful Roger Spottiswoode, who was the director, I was at Eon, which is the name of the company that produces the Bond films, the Broccoli's company, Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson. There's a screening room there, and I was able to screen every day every single Bond movie, which was kind of wonderful.
That's so cool.
And they have also in the basement a kind of elaborate collection of memorabilia, I guess you could say, like every call sheet from Russia with Love, things like that.
Wow.
It was just kind of wonderful. It was like a trip to movie history, actually, visiting that place. And Alan Cameron had, the evil villain in this movie was John Price, who was supposed to be Rupert Murdoch. And I think I think Roger might have preferred somebody else, although I love Jonathan Pryce. I think he was hoping for, he just passed away. Or recently, not recently, but Long Good Friday, Oh, fuck me. Anyway, losing actors' names.
Bob Hoskins.
Bob Hoskins, of course. And I think that would have been, anyway, but who knows? That isn't what happened. And we had the wonderful Jonathan Pryce. And that all these places were concocted for the scale of the Bond movie. But the difference, of course, is that once the revival of 007 was really, whoever it was at UA said, and the Broccoli's, let's go with Pierce Brosnan, and let's scale the movie up again. Let's spend the money. Let's make action beats and action sequences. And there was an old-fashioned way of working, not just in London, but just in the ways those productions were made, where the idea was that you'd go to a foreign country and you'd shoot stunt people, and then you'd end up on a soundstage later, and you'd see a stunt person skiing down the Alps, and then you'd cut to Roger Moore on a soundstage in front of a green screen, kind of pretending to be skiing. And that's the old Bond version. And I think Roger was a really good transition into not doing that. And I'm not sure they did that on GoldenEye, but on our film there was pressure not to take Pierce to Thailand, for instance. So we ended up going to Thailand for all this stuff, and we scouted it. It was like a director scout and a tech scout at the same time, but everybody's familiar with it. The great Vic Armstrong was the second unit director, stunt coordinator, everything. The amazing Vic Armstrong.
Precursor to Wade in a lot of ways.
Just the greatest.
Yeah.
And in my introduction to it, was all this planning and all these things. They were working on the screenplay, and the opening sequence in the movie was shot in the Pyrenees. It's like the French Alps, I guess, right on the border of France and Spain. It's a beautiful area, absolutely stunning. And the idea was you're in Afghanistan, and there's a kind of a convention of evil terrorists getting together and buying weapons and doing all sorts of bad things. And you meet them at the beginning of the movie, and then you introduce James. There's always a lot of thought into how do we meet him?
Right.
How do we find this guy in this thing? And so because Roger was going to stay in England and work on the script, Vic created this miniature diorama of the location and laid out with Roger everything that was going to happen in the location without Pierce, because he was having some problem with his legs and he couldn't run anyway. He had somebody who doubles him anyway when he runs, but he was not feeling. I think he'd hurt his knee, and he probably wouldn't have gone anyway. So this was the old version of Bond. Now we were going to do. So we were going to go to the Pyrenees, and it was Vic, and myself, and 4 cameras, and we were going to shoot all this day exterior work of this thing. And Vic had laid it all out. There was really good storyboards for it. And here were the things we were going to shoot in the Pyrenees, and here are the things that we were going to double when we get back to Pinewood. Here are the shots we're going to make that's going to be Pierce Brosnan, and this is how we're going to tie it all together. So that was, that's not that unusual, but that's the old style of that. And that's something
that was not the opening of the...
That was the opening of that movie. Yeah.
That's how it is now?
No, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. But, it had to be, because actually Pierce wasn't Pierce was not in good shape for whatever reason. And it was shot a month before the movie started.
Wow.
So we went there because there was still snow, and we did all this stuff, and did all these action beats all the way through. And then everything you see that's Pierce Brosnan, we're actually in the back lot. And fake snow, everything else. And it's tried and true. People have been doing that since the movies began.
But that's very different from Mission Impossible.
It is very different because of the nature, again, because of Tom.
Yeah.
And because of the whole philosophy of how movies are made. And this it was a little old-fashioned, but Roger, then, there was pressure not to take Pierce to Thailand for the same reason.
Yeah.
Why have him, why not, just make wide shots of the action beats. And Roger said, come on, we can't do this anymore. You gotta have shots of him. You can't do what you've been doing, where you take him to Cuba for a day and walk him across the street. It's not.
Well, did you have a sort of a more emotional connection to the Bond movies than you had to the Mission Impossible franchise?
Yeah, I did actually, because I grew up with them. Yeah, and they were like, how do you? There was a really touching. It was right after Cubby. When I went over there, Cubby Broccoli had just passed away, and there was a memorial service for him in a theater in London, and it was incredibly moving. He was apparently, he was an incredible producer. He was not the easiest guy to work with.
Right.
And almost everyone came who had worked on the Bond movies and spoke. And they showed clips from all the movies.
Wow.
And it was it was a very honest portrayal, it seemed to me, not having ever met him, that this was Cubby Broccoli, warts and all, we're going to talk about. And the one guy who did not show up was Sean Connery. And which I don't, everybody has their version of that story. I have no idea what happened. But it was a little sad, I think. But at the same time, I got a sense of who these people were, what their company was, what they were all about. And I absolutely felt very, very lucky that I was able to go to that thing. But yeah, I had more of a little boy thing about, the Bond films, and I wanted Pierce to, when the guy's trying to light a cigarette and Pierce comes up with a beautiful gold Dunhill lighter and lights his cigarette and then says, "Filthy habit," and punches him in the face. That's like my idea of a great opening to meet James Bond. And I have that lighter.
Oh, cool.
That's great.
I have it.
So you're going to have a little museum yourself.
No, I don't think so. But, I kept the lighter.
Well, on Bourne, too, at least conceptually, it sort of seemed like another Ghost Protocol in the sense of passing the torch from one actor to another.
Yeah, passing the torch. But, but the amazing thing, I think that the extraordinary thing that some people forget, is the incredible contribution, the reinvention of that kind of a movie by Oliver Wood and Doug Liman. Oliver Wood, went off to make this small little movie with a not a very famous actor in Europe. Didn't cost a hell of a lot of money. And they found a visual language that was very, very different. And, a kind of a style of shooting that movie which seemed more energetic and more honest and real and compelling than I think anybody had ever imagined doing before or had done well before. There'd been self-conscious versions of it where the camera's panning all over the place, and I'm thinking of some television shows from the 90s. But what Oliver Wood and Doug Liman did was they found this kind of handheld, almost stream of consciousness way of shooting all this activity, which felt somehow more real. I don't know if real is the right way, but you always had a sense of geography. You never felt you were being cheated, that they were playing games with the space. You watch that movie, the first one, and it's just gripping. And the whole idea that there's a character who doesn't know who he is and is trying all throughout the whole movie to discover who he is, and that at the same time he has all these skills, like how did I learn all this stuff? How can I speak 12 languages? And how do I know how to fight? And then refuses, every time he gets handed a gun, refuses to use it and throws it away. So I think it's like that's certainly the script, that's Tony Gilroy. But the way they put it together was extraordinary. There were things wrong with it when it was finally finished, which I think got corrected because we had the bad luck of having 9/11 happen. Bad luck. We had a horrible, horrible event take place in this country, which held up the release of that movie. And the things that were wrong with that movie, they decided to address because they had this period of time where they weren't going to release the film. So they went back and shot quite a few days and made all those things I spoke about. A character trying to discover who he was, a character who won't use guns, a character who fights. They went back and refined all that and made it more specific, and they changed the ending. And they made it into what it is. But it really is, I can't say enough about it. Oliver Wood, Doug Liman, and what Paul Greengrass did was, his style, he was famous for taking real events and almost doing the same thing, surrounding things with cameras. I think Doug Liman was a little different. I think that Oliver Wood and, not Oliver Wood, but
Gary Aykroyd was
Gary Aykroyd. They tend to surround things with cameras. which is a different way of working, a little bit more. I mean, they'll put 3 cameras or 4 cameras in a room, and we'll film an event, and we'll find and they'll be improvising, and it's a marvelous sort of organic way of discovering what's going on, and then that footage. It's Gordon Willis had a very derogatory term. He called it dump truck directing. That was Gordon Willis being, one camera, you just shoot that shot, and that's your shot. Yeah. So, Danny but this way is that you are kind of finding the pace and rhythm and performance in the editing room. And those are different kinds of movies. Mm-hmm. And it works so well for the Bourne movies, and so works so well for his, flight, whatever that was, for 93, 93 and all that. So, and that's the marvelous way that Aykroyd did the one he did with about the guy who's the bomb disposal guy,
Hurt Locker.
Yeah, Hurt Locker.
Right.
So those are, in fact, I just had an interesting experience that I was about to do a film that the plug was pulled on. That Aaron Sorkin, Aaron Sorkin wrote an extraordinary script about the Chicago 7.
Oh, yes.
Right? It's called it's Trial of Chicago 7. And it's gone through a number of changes over the years. So I think it was originally written for Spielberg. Mm-hmm. And Sorkin told me, I think I can repeat this, it's like not bad or anything. He said that at one point, Paul Greengrass was involved before Sorkin was going to direct. This is, I don't know how long ago. And he'd seen all of Greengrass's movies, and he's in some conversation with him. Because Sorkin's idea is you're not just improvising your coverage. You're not doing what Paul Greengrass does. You're watching the actors talk, and then it's a more traditional way of directing and shooting. And he said, "Are you going to do that style that you do, where you kind of hose everything down?" Oh, it's a terrible term, but you shoot a lot of stuff. And Greengrass turned, of course I am. And I'm not sure how it all went away, but Sorkin, when he was talking to me about this, he said, I don't think I want to do that. And I went, oh, that's fine with me. But I don't do that. So that's
we'll talk about you also photographed a Bourne movie. So
yeah, I did. Well, legacy. Yeah.
All I did was I just thought I've got to imitate Oliver Wood.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
But I felt like you brought a little more.
I didn't bring anything.
I thought you. I mean, I love what Greengrass did with the second and third one, but like the motorcycle chase that ends Bourne Legacy, I think is just unbelievable.
Well, it is, really and we got to talk about Dan Bradley. Okay, Dan Bradley is the guy who kind of energized all that stuff. Dan Bradley's the second unit director.
Okay,
and the stuff in oh God. I hate to repeat stories that I didn't see it happen. I wasn't there. So, I just hear these things, and everybody has their version, which makes them all sound like a hero.
Right.
But Dan really did an amazing job in Moscow with all that stuff, with that car chase and the tunnel and the motorcycle chase and all that. I mean, he did our movie too. He did the motorcycle chase in.
Bourne Legacy.
In Bourne Legacy. When you shoot bits and pieces, I think we shot a lot of live action pieces there's a thing called the Go-Mobile, which I actually used on the last previous mission, which is, it's kind of like a long tube that goes really fast and that has camera positions and places on it for arms and stuff like that. So you can actually drive in front of somebody or even tow them and shoot lots of unusual shots. In fact, that was the big... We did a really big improvement on the last on Rogue Nation by changing. Greg really wanted to shoot the motorcycle stuff in a kind of spectacular fashion that hadn't been done before, which meant controlling the motorcycle with hydraulics and having an arm built off the back of this Go-Mobile. Think of it as a camera. It's like a narrow camera car. That you could move the camera around all the way around the motorcycle all the way from the front almost to 3/4 back with an arm move going 100 miles an hour, which meant, and we did a series of tests for this. I can't remember the name of the Formula One track in Central California, but we went up there and shot a bunch of proof of concept things to figure out how to do this motorcycle stuff, and just did a standard tow. Before, I think they hadn't done the hydraulic work on it. And then based on that and things we'd figured out where to put the camera, we asked that certain things be done to the go-mobile, that we create an arm, that they, and then the mechanics. So there's actually, while the car is being driven and towing the motorcycle, the tow bar is pretty long, and it's actually hydraulically controlled. So when you go into turns, there's a guy who leans the motorcycle to the side so that the actor sitting on it, going 100 miles an hour. So you can actually get, whatever that percentage or whatever that angle of degree for what the Grand Prix riders do, that we could imitate that.
Wow.
Because Tom Stock doesn't have a helmet on. And he's, he's got a wire.
You see his knee touching the
well,
ground.
No, it is. It absolutely is. I mean, but he's connected to, but still, if a rock came up, he's like weirdly fearless, all the way through. He's talking about someone who doesn't have any adrenaline. I think all he has is adrenaline.
Right.
That's sort of what it is. He probably has extra for the rest of us.
Well, we always ask people who have done more than one of these movies, sort of, why come back?
Oh, because it's always a challenge. It's two things, I think. There's always something you haven't done before. Like, how do I do that? How do we get this figured out? The airplane thing was, God, if I hadn't had Chris Centrella, but just to figure out how to get the camera out of there and how to control it out the window and be able to shoot him.
How did you do that?
I don't remember. You have to look at the making of.
There's an American cinematographer interview with you where I think you talk about having some kind of window built into the wing or something.
It's all lies. That's a lie. No, there was a window in the plane, and we used that actual window to make an arm that went out. And Chris corralled the whole thing with the visual effects, with the special effects people, and they built a very, very strong structure to support a camera that was a motion picture camera that was going to sit inside, like a space cam. One of those things that's aeronautically, it's in a bubble, so you can fly without any wind. Moving the camera around, and the distance it was to figure out how far away it needed to be from. We went out, we lined things up, and it's never exactly right, and so we had something that was very flexible. And of course, Tom, is cabled to that door, and there's a rig inside that plane that's like, it's an absolute truss setup with. It's substantial because you don't want him to fall.
Yeah.
Right. So he's really nailed in there. And but just to take off and land. And I remember I had an interview with, you think these things get out, but I remember whoever called me up from Variety and just said, "Listen, I know that isn't Tom. I know you didn't do it." I go, there's footage of us doing it. What are you talking about? There's people shooting us doing it. There's like EPK of it. What do you think, they're faking all this stuff? That's him on the outside of the plane. How can you think he's not doing it?
Yeah.
It's so clear he's doing it. It is the strangest thing.
And you were on the plane. You sent us that picture of you.
Oh yeah, that's when we first got it.
Did you take that picture?
Yeah, that's when we first. Well, there's an area on the back. We're all in harnesses. We're all wired and all that. And they let the rear cargo door down. And so, of course, immediately Tom walks out on the rear of the car. And like the rest of us wouldn't even go near it.
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't. And we're all, we're okay with them. We're looking out. And we're like, oh, my God, we're 1,000 feet in the air. You get to think about it all the way down. So we just, that's Tom. There he is. This smile.
Yeah.
And that was our first experience on the plane. We took off a few times and watched, and tried to figure out where we're going to do it, how we're going to do it. That was our big, I think it was, were we in Spain for that?
You were in England.
We were in England when we shot it, but I think we were in Spain when we teched it or something. I can't, because that's where they make them. They make them in Spain.
Okay.
Someplace,
right. Would it be okay if we post that photo that you sent us? Is that all right? Or...
I'll have to ask Chris.
Yeah.
I saw actually a different version of it posted on IMDb.
Oh,
it's like someone,
really?
It's on there.
Okay, it's probably okay.
We can ask Chris.
It's not from the movie, so
yeah,
probably
it's amazing.
So and you see there's a line on the cargo door. There's a piece of tape, and he's on the other side of it. That's the line you're not supposed to step on the other side. That's it. There he is. So tragically, unbelievably tragically, that same plane, not the exact same plane, but that model, they build them and then they ship them off to, and I think there was one going to the Turkish Air Force, and they were doing just what we were doing. They were doing touch and goes, and I think this was in Spain. And it wasn't the same pilot. This was his last. He was an English pilot, worked for Airbus, and he was retiring, and this is the last thing he was doing. I would go up to the front and watch these guys. It's just astonishing. This plane is just amazing mechanically, so sophisticated and so extraordinary. But they were doing touch and goes, and they were. It was the same that model plane. It was go to the Turkish Air Force, and they had a fuel mixture issue that came out of a software glitch or something, and one of the engines shut down, and they were doing exactly what we did: taking off, landing, taking off, landing, and one of the engines either shut down or there was some problem, and the pilot made a turn to go back a little early, and he went right into a pylon, and I think half the crew were killed. Oh, it crashed. Gosh. And I mean, it's the same plane. Right?
Wow.
Doing just what we were doing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think it was like a year later. And it just made me think about it. I mean, it is, there's no question, I think, that everybody who works with crews, you end up feeling like there's nobody who works harder, right?
Yeah.
I've been with actors who don't do their off camera. I've been with actors who have people who not only run for them, but stand for them, who kneel for them, you know what I mean? But Cruise is like, he's in great shape. But he's there before you get there in the morning, and he stays after you're gone. He works out. He's, there's just nobody harder working than him. Yeah. There really isn't. And he's also, as an actor, he won't do anything in a scene unless he approves not just of the writing, but he understands what everybody's doing and what his character's doing. I mean, it's how it sort of stays kind of real. Mm-hmm. In these essentially kind of crazy cartoon stories. He grounds you in some kind of reality because of how good he is as an actor. I worked with him years ago and on Magnolia.
Right.
Yeah. Right? And he was the same dude, same guy, totally committed to playing a complete jerk.
Yeah.
Right? He's not one of those actors who he's able to completely let go of his he doesn't have to. He doesn't care if you don't like his character. He doesn't care if you're not interested. He knows he's playing Ethan Hawke and he's going to win, and he wants you to feel there's a certain amount of danger. But also, he's a great comic actor.
Yes.
I mean, the stuff he does with Simon Pegg, that's all based on taking the Mickey out of Ethan Hawke. Mm-hmm. It's, I don't know. He's a complete actor. So he constantly challenges you. I think if you're a director, he becomes your collaborator. If you're making a movie with him, he's your closest collaborator. That's all there is to it. I think Chris would say the same thing. The other thing he does, when we went to do the jailbreak scene in Czechoslovakia, and we had this beautiful 19th century prison, which was kind of V-shaped with 5 stories of glass brick windows that you couldn't see through, but they lit this place like an art gallery. And so all the cells were in these tiers, like 4 stories of tiers with glass bricks lighting them from the outside. And the idea was that he was going to escape from prison, and I wasn't going to really have to light it. It was extraordinary. I mean, it really looked like, it was the most beautiful light in a prison, right? And he goes on the original director scout, not the tech scout. We're on the director. He goes on the tech scout too. We went on the director scout. We went through this, and Jim Bissell, the wonderful production designer, walks us through all the different spaces and describes how in the script this room will be this room will be that, laying this all out for Brad and for me, and so we can understand what's going on. And at some point, Cruz comes up to me and he goes, I mean, it's all written as this is day in the script. Would you have a prison break during the day? And I go, well, I think this looks horrible for a prison break. It looks like an art gallery. And I go, okay. And he says, would this be better at night? What would that mean if you did this at night? I go, well, it means we can't shoot it in 2 weeks because I have to scaffold the whole outside and tent it. We can't shoot at night. We can only shoot during the day, and we have to tent it. We have to do all that. Oh, but you could do all that. Yeah. And he walks over to Granger and others. He walks over to the 2 other guys and Brad and Judge said, Elswit thinks we should do this at night. No, I don't. Yeah. He's sort of half joking.
Yeah.
But then it occurred to Brad and to me that he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
That he was right. He's like doing our jobs, sort of, right? Of course it would look better at night. It should be 3 a.m. That's when prison breaks. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it exciting. So, and that's what adds, $180,000 to the budget. So you got to scaffold the outside of this building. I got to tent the whole thing in. I got to put lights outside, and I have to light the inside. I have to put fluorescents up everywhere. I have to do all this. So all these sort of original. Oh my God, it looks like a night. So I wasn't thinking about the movie. I was thinking about, oh, this looks really great, right? He's thinking about the movie. He's thinking about what it would feel like if this was at night, and how different it would be.
He seems almost like supernaturally attuned to what the audience wants as well.
Yeah,
but
emotionally.
I mean, he knows, he's one of those actors who understands that the way you light something is a real direct connection to how an audience feels about what they're looking at. So he's the whole thing. So that's, you asked me earlier with answering a long question of like, why do you work on those movies? Well, I always learn something, from that experience and from Chris. There's always something that's so complicated and so expansive, and they give you all the tools if you don't waste them. You know what I mean? If you're not just bullshitting around, that if you can get it done, and he's a challenge, like he's demanding, he being Tom, is going to demand that if you feel a certain way about something, he's going to challenge you about it. If he wants to know why. Why do you think that? What's your version of this? Why am I not getting it? Explain to me why you think this is. And, the underwater thing was incredibly complicated.
Yeah,
it really was complicated.
That was supposed to be one shot too.
Well, it's supposed. Yeah, I mean, the original idea was you'd never cut away, and it could have been done that way. But I think to build the tension and to show other things are going on, it couldn't really be cut that way. I think his original hope was that would happen, but the complicated issue was as the animatics developed. What was clear to us watching the animatic was even though you cut away, you're still sitting there kind of on the edge of your seat because you can't believe he's still holding his breath. So you don't have to do it, and I think it happened in the edit. You don't have to see the whole thing happen in real time. You can cut away and still believe that, because we saw that in the animatic. We're watching the animatic, and all of us are going, oh my God, like he can't breathe. And he can't take a breath, and he's holding his breath. And how do you... so I'm not sure where that happened because I'm not there for the editorial process, but I think they did a great job putting it together finally. But the hard part for shooting it, it was designed so we could connect all the pieces. So you could do it in real time if you wanted to do an edit that way. But the original visual effects guy on that from ILM, whose name I tragically forget, it's wonderful, because they changed visual effects houses in pre-production. So and he was from ILM, and I'd spent a long time at ILM shooting.
You started
rocket
at ILM.
Ships, yeah, sort of.
Yeah. Were you there when Fincher was there?
Yeah. I'd done way too many rocket ships, right? And it was kind of a button-pushing flunky. I can't minimize enough my contribution to those movies.
Okay, well, you worked on some...
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
So Dennis Muren was the great Richard Edlund, Dennis Muren, Crystal, all those guys are just brilliant. It was like being the dumbest guy in chemistry class in high school. Being there with those guys. Absolutely was. So, anyway, to get back to this, so looking at the animatics and the effects people and the stunt people were going, how do we move these actors around this giant? Because we knew we were going to do it on the big tank at Pinewood because it's actually big enough. But it had to be a green screen environment. They were going to build that set. It was such a huge set underwater. It's not going to work. So, oh God, I can't remember his name. So we sat there and we went, there's no way. They can't move him around the space, and there's no way. We're doing rocket ships. Yeah, we're doing rocket ships. What that means is that if you look at all the Star Wars movies and you have the Millennium Falcon going at you at 150 miles an hour and then you pan around with it and it goes away from you, it's not really moving. What's moving is the camera. Mm-hmm. The Millennium Falcon's sitting there rotating on its axis and maybe going up and down and doing all sorts of silly things. And what's really going on is the camera is on a long track and it's moving at the Millennium Falcon, which is only 14 inches long. It's moving at high speed and pans all the way around it, and then it moves away from the Millennium Falcon. And we right away knew that's the only way we could do it. So all the motion that they're doing where they're going around and up and down and sideways and turning, that's really happening. They're on various different rigs. Sometimes, Tom is always on something. He's got some connection to his hip, or in the more elaborate ones, there's other stuff happening. But, and the wonderful Ms. Ferguson, I don't think there was ever attached to anything. I think when she comes into the water, she's just around him. But we knew that it was all going to be what they call transferred motion. So when they appear to be moving away from us or coming towards us, it's the camera that's moving. They're static, and they're rotating and turning, but they're not actually traveling in space, linearly. There's no two-dimensional part of this move. It's just them spinning and running. So figuring that out, how to do that in the confined space in the space we had to work in was tough. Also, there was a real part of the set was built. Whenever they touched something, there was a section, I would say maybe 1/4 of that donut set. I think Bissell built maybe 40 feet of it or 30 feet. I can't remember anymore. So whenever they touch something or grab something or pull something out, there's a real set there.
Okay.
But the rest of it is all artificial. And we actually shot plates of the real set at different distances underwater, so you could get a sense of what it would look like if you were that far away from something, how much the water would change, the contrast and the quality of what the set, the color and everything else. So we made, at the end of the whole sequence, we made different, they may have used it as references, but it's all a computer created environment. It's a CGI environment except for the things they touch. And then in the centerpiece and all that, we had things spinning and went by them, and the hard part for me was figuring out how to light it so it looked like something that people don't go there, supposedly, but you had to be able to see it. So what could you do industrial? So lighting from underneath seemed to be the only solution. And it seemed like a nice way to do it because it's enclosed. You don't want to feel lights from above. You want it to all come from below. So we cheated that a little bit. And I had the great Pete Romano, the underwater DP, come in. And for a month while I think we were in Morocco at that time, he shot proof of concept with stunt people. So he free dove, the shots that we ended up doing later on the hydro crane. So most of it was shot off a crane. But he, in order to figure out if this thing would work, had the stunt people R&D, all the stuff that they needed to do to get the actors to spin and turn and do all that as in the previs. And then Pete free dove a lot of it. And then when we got back, we figured out where the track needed to be, that the camera would be moving on, the underwater camera. We put a camera on a track and turned it and, controlled the head remotely. And there was straight moves, there was curved track, there were, each shot had a kind of different design to it. And then when he's on the side of the set, we had the hydro. And we realized that to do the visual effects, it would be really great to have a very big piece of, we couldn't shoot on motion picture film because we couldn't leave the camera underwater that whole time. And let as much, we didn't want to be reloading, we didn't want to be doing a whole lot, and also we wanted a very, very big piece of digital information for all the visual effects to work, and I didn't think it would compromise anything to do that. So we got, luckily, Arri had just finished the Arri 65, and I think we were the first production camera to use. They didn't have any lenses. They had like a 28 and then something else. So we shot the whole thing with a 28, which was fine, which we didn't struggle with at all. They were just in the midst of R&Ding it, and we had a very limited time. It could be underwater longer than 1,000 feet of film, but not a whole lot longer. But they were still working on a lot of bugs, but we were able to make it work, and it worked really well. It's the difference between Arri and Panavision. Arri is a camera company and Panavision's sort of a lens company. And so Arri had this marvelous camera but no lenses for it. And they couldn't get anyone to build them probably because they were going to be so expensive because the image circle had to be so big. So they were essentially, it was a 2 1/4. They had to make something that would work on a 2 1/4 film camera. And I guess Zeiss probably said, we need $1 million for every lens, whoever they go to for their lenses. And so what they did, which was a secret at the time, was just went on eBay and bought every old Hasselblad lens they could find. And then
really?
Rebarreled them. And if that's a lie, you can call me at home, Arri. But one of your guys told me that. Anyway, that's what they did. And they found all these Hasselblad lenses, not a lot of them, but some of them. Wow. Which have all sorts of wacky problems. These are all lenses designed in the late 50s, early 60s. And it's not a bad thing. And they had all sorts of, optical vignetting and chromatic aberration issues and things. But they worked fine and it was actually worked out really well for us. It was certainly as sharp as they ever needed to be. And one of the problems with digital lenses, modern lenses now, is they're too sharp. But yeah, so that's how we did that. So
seems fairly straightforward.
It was a long process, but that's the difference. No one else will let you do that. No one else will give you the time to R&D it. Nobody, because it's Cruise. It's him going, how do we do this right?
But Elswit's the producer too, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to go, I have to do this right. This can't be bullshit. This can't be half-assed. This can't be, this has to be right. This has to be right. So who else has that control? Who has that power? I mean, I don't know. You have to go back to old-time director-producers to control a movie like that. And it isn't like it's an unlimited budget, but it's like, how do we do this right? How do we make this really exciting? How do we make it compelling? How do we not skimp? How do we not bullshit our way through this? And at the same time, how do we do something that doesn't have to be exactly that? How do we find a way to do this that doesn't have to spend $1 zillion? So we can. What are the shortcuts? What are the ways we can save money with it? So anyway, that's going on too.
And he's also a big proponent of using film over digital crews.
I guess so. I mean, he actually insisted that his EPK get reshot on film at one point. Yeah. I think he likes the way it looks. Everybody. I mean, that's the thing we've talked ourselves into. It's there's nothing wrong. I mean, digital can look close to looking like film, and it is a different quality. It's a different image. But I think he likes the anamorphic lenses. He likes the way film looks, and I'm glad to keep. I always thought that was going to be an arrow that was always going to be in our quiver, and I'm sorry to see it disappear. And so it's nice to have that, the next thing I'm going to do is going to be on film because the director wants to shoot film. I think that's kind of wonderful that he does. And it's still enough labs working and doing excellent work. And the way films finish now, which essentially, even if you shoot on film, you finish, you make a digital product for release, you can do extraordinary stuff with it. And it does have a quality. Mm-hmm. It just does. I mean... Sorry, everybody.
Was there a conversation with Christopher McQuarrie about how to change the look at all when you did Rogue Nation?
I don't know if we had that specific a conversation. I mean,
I love the way the skin tones look are just beautiful, really beautiful in Rogue Nation. I didn't know if that was
as opposed to Ghost Protocol.
Well, they're both great. It's just like I don't know. Rogue Nation feels warmer to me a little bit. I don't know why.
Maybe it was just because we were in Morocco for a lot of it. We were in places, and even when we went back to London, I mean, I'm not sure if that was ever. I'd have to think through the whole movie again. I don't think we had a specific conversation about how we wanted flesh tones to look. Yeah. It's usually not a conversation I've had. Usually you hear about it when you shoot tests and stuff, and they go, "I hate that," or "That guy looks horrible." Right. I mean, we went for a cold look for our wonderful villain in that movie. It was one of the great actors. What a great actor.
You're talking about for Sean Harris?
For Sean. But when I think when we captured Simon Pegg and tortured him and beat him up and stuff like that, and we put Sean in the cube later. I think that was the only time it got kind of cool. And the night chase through the Inns of Court, that we did in London, where we were trying to. There's these things are complicated to put together, but they're. I don't know. They're kind of driven by this overwhelming urge to kind of startle and excite and surprise, and all the sort of things that get factored into what I do are kind of about that, even though they're not as specific as she would like. We'd like the movie to feel warmer than the last one or anything. I mean, I don't think we ever have that discussion. The thing I was most intrigued about, the thing that was a lot of fun but was really complicated, was the opera sequence. And that was the other one I couldn't remember. I want to be tied to a plane and take off and land, and I want to hold my breath underwater and look like I don't have an aqua lung, and I want to ride a motorcycle 150 miles an hour without a helmet, and I want to go backstage at an opera and with a gun and beat somebody up 100 feet in the air. So that's what you start with, right?
Right.
So. And then how do we tell what's the story around those four events? So it was, I'm trying to remember if it was Jim, probably it was Chris who just fell in love with Turandot, or maybe it was Jim, I don't know, he probably played a lot of records. Jim's an opera buff, Jim Bissell. And the idea was that during this one particular aria, Miss Dorma, in this climactic moment where it doesn't matter what, but that this guy would get shot,
right?
And figuring out how to do that and getting a stage big enough to recreate what the Vienna Opera looks like was the big deal there. And we actually shot a lot of it at the Vienna Opera, but just did plates and never went on stage at the real Vienna Opera to shoot. I I don't think, except to do blue screen work, I think. But we shot the outside and we shot the lobby and stuff like that.
This crazy establishing shot inside of it where it's like
yeah,
it's really wide lens.
Yeah. It's probably a 30 and we go up like this. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's a wonderful place to work, and they were so nice to us. Well, that was one of the great thrills for me. You know, when you do what we do, you get to go scout all these places. You know, if you're shooting a film in New York, you get to go to all these apartments you'd never be able to afford to live in. You know, you get to see all this stuff. And one of the great thrills of that movie was I got to go backstage at the Royal Opera in London and the and the Vienna Opera, and just wander backstage and take pictures during performance.
Wow.
Which, God, I don't think it's amazing when I think about it. And everybody thought I was doing something. I mean, people didn't know I knew who I was, but they were treated me like I should, like, oh yeah, that's fine. You know, nobody said. Everybody was like, hi, can we help you in some way? And I took all these shots of people, all the backstage people at the Vienna Opera, and I later sent them pictures of them at work and stuff like that. I don't think anybody probably had done that for them long. Anyway, but it was kind of a joy, and I got to see some things I'd never, and just to be backstage and watch that go on and see the mechanics of opera production and the people who ran that show. There's a wonderful woman who was who was the stage manager at the Royal Opera, who was just fantastic. And you see how that stuff is done, and I was just in awe. It was just fantastic. And they brought a guy, because the actors who were in Turandot, it's going on too long, isn't it?
No, not at all.
The actors who were playing the roles in Turandot were young opera singers. They knew they were going to be singing to playback, and it wasn't going to be them. But they brought in this marvelous man who was an assistant director and associate director, I can't remember which, and of course I'd have to look up his name again, I don't remember, who directed them. Because they had to create a real version of Turandot on stage that we could photograph. And he did what I never imagined you would ever do. He walked with the music, with a guy on a piano, playing the music. He gave these young actors who'd never played these roles, these young singers, every single emotional beat of the scene. Here's where you turn, here's where you look, this is where you feel this is where you feel that, here's where you're separate. And he blocked it all out, walked them through it, and gave them their absolute, the emotional life of the character from beat to beat, from a musical beat to beat. It was great. Anyway, so that's how he put it together. So it was the most rock solid thing we had. It actually was. Everything else, we had no fucking idea how to do. So to go backstage and figure out how to move Tom Cruise from sneaking in, going across the stage, scampering around, going up to that place, finding the whole thing out. It was kind of not carefully storyboarded, and we didn't really work it out ahead of time in the way we should have, because we didn't have enough time. Because we had, getting on those beams, and I had to put a crane, Chrissy put a crane on top of a scissor lift, so we had a 50-foot techno on top of a 50-foot scissor lift and 80 feet in the air. And
we love that fight with the tall guy.
Yeah, it doesn't, the guy. And so those things don't happen. It doesn't happen quickly, right? It doesn't happen. And I always knew in the back pocket, because I had the guys who were the lighting directors, and I think he was the lighting director for the Royal Opera, I'm not sure, but I had guys who did this, light the stage. On the other side, the real stage is in relation to the backstage. They lit the opera, all right? I had to light the area around it, and I had to change some of it because it couldn't work for us because there were too many shadows in places and stuff. But essentially, they laid it in the way they would light an opera, and they had all their equipment and all that. And then I just kind of whatever I needed to do to tweak certain beats of it. But I knew that was sitting there, and the easiest thing for us to do was going to be to go out and turn that on. Because we have to figure that out. That guy had figured it out.
Right.
And we knew where everything was, and I'd watched it, and I'd seen it. So everyone was a little worried because we'd spent so much time backstage when we were going to get to the opera. And my whole whine during this whole period was everybody was all excited about the opera. I hate to say it, Jim, I always wanted to do an opera. Just costumes, everything was like so exciting. I went, the whole fucking scene is backstage. Yes. Forget the opera. Da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
But, you can say that. But anyway, so we've managed to probably go 3 days over backstage, and then we had like 9 minutes to do the opera. But because, well, it's a little better than that. But because they were so together and they were so locked in, it went really, once we got out of the backstage part and started shooting the pieces with the opera, it went relatively quickly, very quickly, and we made up the time.
There's a shot that's backstage that I wanted to ask you about, because it's like Ethan Hunt and Ilsa are going up this spiral staircase and there are guys down below. It's just deep focus. I mean, it's beautiful.
This is perfect for a radio.
No, it's just yeah, you can imagine this on the radio. No, it's just a very wide lens looking straight down.
I mean, it's just a beautiful shot. Looking down,
you get
way down below, and
you get a
anamorphic lens flare.
Yeah, you get a fair amount of you get a fair amount of depth of field when you do stuff like this.
It's beautiful.
They're looking for them as they run away.
Yeah.
Love
that.
You look at that shot and go, yeah, that's pure Elswit.
Right? No, I don't think that at all. I don't. I just don't. I mean, lots of times things just present themselves, and other times they grow out of storyboards, and sometimes they grow out of rehearsals. And Chris is always, the great thing about Chris is he's incredibly flexible about, that's better, or let's do this, or let's do that.
Right.
There was one specific thing he had in mind. He always wanted to talk. He always talked about, he wanted, when you meet Ilsa, when you see her for the first time, he wanted her leg. He wanted the gun pointing out of the window, and he wanted her shape. Where she's aiming the gun. You wanted to see her leg, and those are that's a wonderful key image that he had in his head.
Yeah.
So we do things like that from time to time, certainly. Yeah.
Well, you are the most humble genius I think we've ever talked about.
Oh, stop it!
But could you point out a shot from each Mission Impossible movie that you're really proud of?
Not really. No, I can't think of anything. Well, you should ask me that a long time. I don't know. It's been so long since I've said. I don't know. I mean, there's lots of. It's not like I'm not proud of them. It's just that it's such a collaborative way of working in the movies. It's not like, I did this. It's just some people could say that. I suppose.
Know, but you.
It's not. It's never that. It's never. I came up with this. You know what? I will say that and maybe someone will call me a total liar, but I thought I kind of came up with the idea of going out the window with Tom and opening it up to anamorphic.
Yeah.
And then to IMAX.
And it goes out and goes up.
It goes out and goes up and goes down. It was a tricky thing to do.
We felt vertigo.
You're supposed to.
I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah, you're supposed to. But I mean, directors really, they leak into your movie no matter what. Nobody stands there and goes, "What do I do now?"
Right?
Yeah.
You're always working. If you have a great collaborative relationship and things are going well, everybody contributes. I can't really take the credit. You know what I did? There was on Paul, the movie I did with Paul, Daniel movie, There Will Be Blood. Yeah. And you go through that whole process, and it seemed it wasn't a troubled shoot, but it was a difficult shoot. There was a lot of stuff going on, and it was it wasn't a joy. But it was really creative and wonderful, and it was a great experience, and went through the whole thing. And the finish on it, the post on it, because it's again it's film. It's Paul insists on photochemical. I tried to show him some digital fixes on something, and he just said no, I don't want to do it. So we're not doing that. And okay, so we just finished it photochemically. There's no sleight of hand in there. There's a few visual effects, adding oil wells and stuff like that. But I never saw the movie as an audience sees the movie. Because when you're doing post, you guys know this, you're sitting there and you're watching edits, or you go to the lab and you're looking at the movie, and you're constantly watching it for what your work is at that moment, whether you're timing it or, it's like you never enjoy the movie. You never sit back and forget about you and see it the way an audience sees it. And about a year later, when I was on Mission, they had a screening of There Will Be Blood at a place in London called the Roundhouse, which is this marvelous venue for music and other stuff, where they screen the movie with a live orchestra. And what's his name, the composer? Johnny was playing second violin. They're all wearing, the whole orchestra is a young orchestra, they're all wearing kind of suits and ties and looking nice. And Johnny Greenwood's wearing T-shirt and jeans, and he's playing second violin. He's sitting there. And they show the movie, they do this now a lot, where they show, without the music track. So the music's played live by an orchestra. And there was a woman who played the Brahms violin concerto, the piece that's a little truncated in when they ignite the well. When they start the well up and all that. And it was overwhelming. And you sit at these tables with other people, and if you sit on the floor of this space, and everybody has wine, and it's like a dinner. It's like you're in your living room, and you're at a round table with 8 or 9 or 10 other people, and the whole floor is filled with people, and people who love the movie. Probably a lot of them had seen it. And I sat there, and for the first time after about 3 glasses of wine, I felt I was really I'd forgotten. I was watching the movie. For the first time, I was really reacting to stuff that I'd forgotten, and then I was a little overwhelmed by it. And I just was, in a way that I didn't expect. I was moved by it, shocked by it. It had an enormous impact on me. Wow. In a way that it clearly does for other people, but it never had for me. And at the end, and I was with my wonderful friend Amanda, and I'm sitting with her, and at the end, half drunk, the lights come up. Nobody knows who there's no connect. There's nobody there who I know her at all. And I just turned to her and I go, you know what? I really did deserve the fucking Academy Award. And I kind of never felt that before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
I thought, poor Roger didn't win again. It's like going through my head. So, so that was it.
Wow.
You bring up, I have to ask this because Punch Drunk Love is one of my top 5 favorite movies, and Paul Thomas Anderson is so amazing. I just wanted to ask about, I guess, your process with him, and I also wanted to ask specifically.
I don't know what it is anymore. It's like a bad married couple.
Well, are you guys going to get back together?
I don't know. Probably not. I mean, it depends on how he feels. I would do it again. I mean, I had a terrible time on... terrible time, I shouldn't say that.
Inherent Vice?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't enjoy myself in Inherent Vice. It was like a really pleasant... I think, it was a combination of me and Paul just not getting along, and I can't really, I can be as immature as him, There's just a level of that.
Lens flares that you have in Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah, well, that's really Paul. It's Paul going, I mean, I love those. The anamorphic lens flare and how to get them to happen on cue. And it means we put Joker bars, which were they're little HMI lights, on C-stand arms, just out of the view of the camera. Yeah. And they'd uncover them at certain times and cover them up. Wow. And there's one scene, I think it was with Philip Seymour Hoffman, where we overdid it. And I think we reshot. But it's a subtle, all the way through that movie, there's just this enormous interest in color and design, and in a way that is really, the production design, I'm trying to remember, what's this? Anyway, at the beginning, here's a great Paul. Here's Paul. The beginning of that, and Paul's, we know we're going to do the blue suit. It's kind of stolen a little bit from A Woman is a Woman, the Godard movie. Jean-Claude Briolet wears a blue suit. Paul loved the suit, and we looked at the movie. We got a print of the movie from the DP, the great Raoul Godard, who I think just passed away. And it's just an extraordinary movie in every way. And anyway, but the production designer and I were trying to talk Paul into, well, you know what? What can his space not just be white? Can it be like, can we paint the wall something else? And we did tests where he painted the outside, his space, his warehouse space. Yeah. What if the gray wall in the background had a color? What if we're thinking all this through, and he just instinctively, this is a guy who's never been to film school and not design class or anything like that. He just instinctively, it just seems wrong to me. I just want everything to be I want the only color in the movie to be the blue of Adam's costume and the various colors that Emily wears. And I was going, why don't I? And then when I started seeing tests, and I realized it's figure ground. It's like the whole movie is essentially a background for those two actors and the colors that they wear. And Mark Bridges' extraordinary color design for Emily, and of course this blue suit, which I think he made like 10 of, and we shot 10 different shades of blue. Paul finally picked the one he liked. And then that figure ground thing, that whole idea that the whole film we'd paint everything white. We'd avoid every single color we could. We painted the walls white in his apartment. We painted the exterior of the supermarket that he runs past white. We painted everything white or gray or black, so that the only colors you'd see and you wouldn't feel manipulated by it. That you just feel that this is because what the movie was it was a fantasy. The movie took place as a fairy tale. It had to feel that way, and to take these horrible, banal, ugly locations in the San Fernando Valley, where Paul loves, and feel the magic of that, meant changing them in a way that they really just became this marvelous. And the one way to do it was to simplify the color palette and just go white, gray, or black, and make everything about Emily's costume. And there's, there are a few places where we don't do it. And the big change would be Hawaii.
Yeah.
You get to Hawaii, and it becomes a sort of different. All of a sudden, you're into the warmth of the locations we picked and the places we went. But that Adam's world is this monochromatic universe that he lives in, which is a real reflection of who he's playing. Who's that guy, and that Emily brings him out of that, and that at the end, it's a really loving, caring, emotionally moving film.
Yeah,
and I think it has a lot to do with the way we designed it.
Yeah.
Just one.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, one last quick question about.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Did you put a light on top of an 18-wheeler driving out of there when they come out of the restaurant?
There's an electrician up there too, which is not a good idea. And I think he's strapped down.
Crazy.
I hope. I can't remember. But
every time I watch that, and I'm like, I think they put a light on top of that.
Well, he actually has to pan the light into the camera.
Wow.
And then pan it off.
Wow. Cool.
All right, well, this is our big question.
Uh-oh.
This is what I do every time. Okay, ready?
Okay.
We want you to rank the Mission Impossible movies.
Fuck, I don't even know all of them anymore. I can tell you number 12 would be the John Woo. I mean, I like the De Palma. I like the De Palma, and I love JJ's a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
And in all honesty, I think that Fallout's probably great. I bet, but I didn't see it.
Oh,
I was so sad. No,
I'm
gonna go see it. I was really sad that I couldn't do it.
They're showing it in 35 at the Vista in March.
I'll go right now. Okay. I'll have a personal screening at Paramount. But I really, I felt bad. I didn't want to, and it's kind of like I didn't want to.
Well, you know what? They just announced 2 more. So have you talked to
Corey? They're sort of beating around the bush right now. I don't know. But it's a huge commitment because you got to go back. They're back to back, and they're So I honestly would. I mean, I would not say no. I mean, and I'm free next year.
Well, for both of us,
as far as I know.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your
day.
Oh,
it's a pleasure.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Seriously.
I'm glad. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
And we're back.
We're back, and that was one of my favorite interviews we've ever done. And I wish we can go back to in person soon, but we'll see.
I think we'll get there soon. We got some stuff in the hopper.
We've had a couple in person. We had the Maggie Q,
and
we had Chris Peck, but it would be great to get into more of a groove, getting people in person. But anyway, thank you all so much for sticking around, and I want to give a special thank you to Sonia Miranda and Ben Wright. Thank you to Sonia and Ben for making this episode possible. I also want to credit our mixer and editor, Luke Burson, and our composer, Kevin Blumenfeld. So a big thank you to them. And of course, sign up for our Patreon, patreon.com/lightthefuse. We do bonus episodes every week, or you can sign up at a higher level and be a part of our bonus chat that we do once a month with an amazing group of people, which is so fun. And we talk about movies and Mission Impossible, and it's great. And you get the inside scoop of everything that's going on behind the scenes with the show. What else, Drew?
Well, I want to encourage people to follow us on social media at LightTheFuse-Pod on Instagram and Twitter. That's sort of the front line for all of the news that's going to break and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, and TeePublic I forgot to mention, too.
TeePublic, okay.
Check out our TeePublic page.
Did you mention the website?
No, I did not mention our website, which is lightthefusepodcast.com. And there you can be linked to our TeePublic page through the merch tab, or you can go to the episode guide tab and check out all our show notes for our past episodes. So please do that. There's a lot of great videos and images and other things that we share there that is a great companion to the show.
And if you could like, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you are listening to this fine podcast, and, spread the word, tell people. If you're working with 10 people, I'm going to say 2 of them are closet Mission Impossible fans. Right?
Yeah, at least.
At least, come on.
A couple of them might also not realize how much of a fan they could be.
That's true.
But if they get turned on to the movies, then they could be like, oh my God, these are amazing. Where can I go to find out even more about the making of them?
Yeah, and you know where you can find that out? Right here, baby. So start yapping. But yeah, we'll be back next week with something. We don't know what exactly, but it'll be good. We promise.
But we've got some exciting stuff in the works.
We do. But yeah, we will talk very soon. So thank you so much, guys.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. Before we go, another mission, should you choose to accept it, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember that you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LightTheFusePod, and email us questions or comments at lightthefusepodcast@gmail.com. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.